Wow. It's been quite a while, hasn't it? Anyway, hi everyone tuning in. I'm going to wait for some people to show up. I'm going to see here. Let's see. Somebody has. Oh, okay, let's see. Who all do we have here showing up? No one's really commented yet. I'll wait. Yeah, as you can see by the pinned comment on the live stream, I am not going to be inviting anybody to this. This is just going to be a one-man show. Hello, Kenny. Now, what I'm going to do here is there's a video that kind of a series that's been in the works for quite some time, but I just couldn't really figure out exactly how to do it. Hang on. So like many of you, I'm sure like many of you enjoy, a lot of you may enjoy reading subreddit stories, like the entertaining stories on like channels like r slash or Bumfress or Dark Fluff, one of my personal favorites. I've been wanting to do a little something where I do some stories of my own. And I initially planned to make a video where Microsoft Sam would be reading them, but I've just gotten lazy and I couldn't really finish it. However, I do have the script here. Hey, Morgs. Or Morgs, my bestie Morgan. So, I do have a script that I prepared probably, I would say last year is when it was made. But I couldn't let this go to waste, so hang on just 1 second. Sorry about that, folks. I had to get my phone. I was like, where was it? So I don't know if I'm going to be making this into an actual series or not, or maybe I'll do it if I continue. Maybe I'll do it if I do streams, more often. Because it's been a very long time since I've done a stream. I really like listening to subreddit posts and those videos, like where the commentator will put on a funny voice for the entitled people. And speaking of which, that is going to be the subreddit from which these stories are coming from. Okay, that was a weird way to say it. Hey, Emily. So, this is Crazanity subreddits r/entitled people. For this, we've got a jerk demanding an employee pay for his cigarettes. We've got a woman trying to set someone on fire. We've got an elderly Karen in a hospital demanding biscuits. And a racist restaurant host who quits after nobody agrees with his beliefs. And I am reading from the script, by the way, so bear with me. Well, everyone, go ahead and grab yourself a snack and or drink and get comfortable as I get to reading. Our first post comes from a user by the name of accident_prone9988 and is titled, "You paid for a kid's milk, now buy my cigarettes." Let's take a look. I used to work at a little convenience store in a very small town. Every customer was a regular. I had this one kid who was about 12 years old. He came every school day on his bike. He bought a chocolate milk and a thing of cheese crackers every day. The total at the time was, in US dollars, $2.08 after tax. The kid always paid in change like it came out of his piggy bank. One day, he came in with this look that said he had a really bad day. He shuffled through the store and grabbed his usual. You know what? Let's not make this totally silent. I'm going to put on some music. Hopefully you can still hear me. Alright, I hope it's not drowning out my voice. You can tell me if it is and I'll stop the music, okay? Anyway, back to the story. He shuffled through the store and grabbed his usual, but was short by about 10 cents. He went to put his crackers up, and I pulled a dime out of my pocket, smiled at him, and told him he's all good and to enjoy his snack. The kid thanked me and left looking quite a bit happier. The next customer was a regular as well, but was a man in his 40s wanting his usual pack of cigarettes. I ring him up and tell him the total. He smiles and says, "Well, aren't you paying for it?" I tell him no. He proceeded to yell at me that if I'm buying customer stuff, that I should pay for his cigarettes. There was a line of customers behind him that saw what had happened with the kid. I tell him there is a difference between helping a kid who is slightly short for an after-school snack and a full-grown man trying to force a woman to buy his smokes. He starts yelling at me about favoritism, and I look him in the eyes and tell him, "Yeah, and?" He proceeds to yell insults at me before I simply grab his cigarettes and put them back on the shelf. The guy's like, "What are you doing? I'm buying those!" I respond, "Not today and not from me. Please leave." He starts to reach across the counter when I step back. Now, it's important to note that I was about 7 months pregnant at the time. Whoa, what the hell? And stepping back revealed my pregnant belly. I'm short, so the counter typically hid this feature. I wasn't doing it to reveal anything. I was just getting him out of reach. Customers behind him started to almost riot about him attacking a pregnant woman for helping a kid. The guy was no longer a regular. He left in a huff, and every customer behind him started an after-school snack fund for the kid. Well, that's nice. Started with the first guy putting an extra $1 on the counter for the kid, and it just kept going till I set a jar. The kid had free chocolate milk for almost a month before I had to go on maternity leave. Wow. OP, sorry you had to go through that horror deal. This man clearly had problems. And he crossed the line, not only taking into account the fact that he attacked you, but the fact that you were 7 months pregnant at the time. It's one thing to attack a woman, which is incredibly messed up on its own, but when someone attacks a pregnant woman, that's going way past the line. It's a damn good thing the other customers backed you up and called him out for his behavior. Hello. Not to mention the fact that this jerk thought he was entitled to get OP to pay for his cigarettes based on a nice gesture she did for the kid. But I'm also really amazed and impressed that the other customers took it upon themselves to start an after-school snack fund for the boy. Well, kudos to them for doing something so wonderful. And I'm really glad that kid was happy in the end. All right, with that first post out of the way, let's move on to our second post, which was written by Donter_Max, entitled "Woman Tries to Set Me on Fire." Looks like we're in for a very interesting story here. Before we take a look, can you guys hear me okay over the background music? If you can't, I'll turn it off. Just tell me if you guys are able to hear it well. Because I don't know if you can. Okay, good. Okay, good. So I don't need to turn the music off. All right. Second post. Let's take a look. I understand that the title might seem exaggerated, and given the circumstances, it probably wasn't a serious threat, but at the first moment, I definitely took it that way. Anyway, let's start at the beginning. Last weekend, I was at a festival which carries quite a bit of relevance in the area. What's special about this festival is that it uses what some locals call the Nazi festival area, given that it was used for the NSDAP rallies from 1933 to 1938, and was going to be used for much longer if it wasn't for the war. There are reminders of Germany's darkest past like every 5 meters. Nowadays, it serves as a memorial... Sorry, stuttered there. So, nowadays it serves as a memorial/museum and occasionally as a venue for big events, like said festival. Anyways, keep in mind the special history of that place. So, I was generally having a good time, as there was no shortage of alcohol and people were actually giving me lots of attention because I was wearing a unicorn costume, just to stand out a little. To be honest, it was hot AF and rather impractical, but people generally found it funny, and especially the security personnel always smiled when they saw me, and that made it worth it. As the day went on, I saw a guy with a jacket that had a very cool patch, and I thought to myself, I can't sew a patch on in that short time until the next act. But I do have a sticker with a message, so I'll just stick that on for now. The message on the sticker in question: FCKNZS. Given that I paid attention in history class, I can tell you with 100% certainty that fuck Nazis is not a controversial statement to make. It is the only position to support. If you disagree with me about this, go back to whatever cave you came from and fuck yourself. So generally, I had a great time. Billy Talent was playing, Green Day was next, and people now seemed to enjoy my outfit even more. That's when I felt a little exhausted and stepped out of the mosh pit to take a breath. While facing the stage, I felt someone touching the horn of my unicorn costume and doing jerk-off motions. Oh dear God. I looked around, and because this wasn't the first time, I said, well, that's it, oh my God. The man and the woman, both in their early to mid-20s, laughed, but the laugh died down when they saw my sticker, which was placed on my chest, by the way. The woman tried to take it off, and I said, no, this needs to stay. I'm an anti-fascist unicorn. She still tried to pull it off, and I asked, being very optimistic, you need one? I got some more. She said, yeah, give me all of them. I thought something was wrong and only gave her one. She tried to light it on fire, which didn't work. To which I said, it is common knowledge that Nazis want to burn shit, so we're prepared. That won't work. She then held the lighter towards my costume and said, doesn't matter, you're gonna burn anyways. Oh, what the hell? At that moment, I was a little nervous. On the one hand, I thought, she wouldn't do that, right? I mean, an incident like that would likely mean the festival would be canceled, right? Also, there's plenty of people around to witness/help me, and security was only 5 meters or so away to detain her should things escalate. On the other hand, I thought, this woman, actually I had some other choice words in my mind for her, but I can't remember all of them, came to the former Nazi party rally grounds and tried to set a fuck Nazi sticker on fire. It takes a different kind of ignorance, stupidity, and lack of social awareness to try that. Who knows what she'd do? Long story longer, I was too stunned to say anything smart, so I just slapped the lighter away and mumbled something like, leave the fucking room and go back to 5th grade history. But I doubt she heard it. The festival in general was insane, but this little incident on the first day threw a shadow over the other days for me too. That is until the last day when about 50 to 60,000 people did a middle finger wave dedicated to the German far-right party and chanted that the entire city/country hates them. That restored my faith in humanity a little. Wow. Just wow. You know, sometimes it doesn't take much for a person to reveal their true colors. And this woman wasn't even trying to deny it either. Plus, the way she threatened OP with that lighter and said he would burn anyway. If I had witnessed that kind of behavior, hell, if I had been the target of it, I would have absolutely called the cops. This isn't the kind of thing someone should just get a slap on the wrist for. Regardless, OP, I'm glad to hear you enjoyed the rest of the festival. Our third story comes from Soft Sakura Blossom and is titled, I Want a Biscuit! The 2-day saga of a hospital Karen. Let's take a look. This is going to be long, but full of entitlement. I was in hospital and ended up being put in the observation unit because no specialist beds were available. The OBS unit is a catch-all ward where patients are put if they're not in imminent danger but need regular monitoring. It's bright and extremely noisy, so nobody can sleep well. Unfortunately, Biscuit Karen arrives at 10 p.m. on day 1. Why is she called Biscuit Karen? Because she wants a biscuit, and she's shouting this loudly enough for the whole OBS unit to hear. Never mind the time or that we're mostly trying to sleep. Never mind that her blood sugar is 8.5 elevated and she's diabetic, so she really doesn't need more sugar. But hey ho, the long-suffering nurses find her a biscuit and ask her to be quiet. Biscuit Karen does not quieten down because shouting is her default setting, and she doesn't seem to notice that other patients exist. After 10 minutes of solid noise pollution, she wants another biscuit. The nurses give it to her. More noise. Then another 15 minutes later, she shout calls for another biscuit. The nurses are occupied, so nobody answers her immediately. So she shouts her request louder, as if we all hadn't heard her already. This is where the nurses begin to lose patience. She is told to be quiet, and her blood sugar level is mentioned. However, Biscuit Karen insists, so she's given another fucking biscuit. Maybe the nurses drugged this one, because Biscuit Karen soon goes to sleep and snores loudly. This was a taste of what was to come, but nobody in the OBS unit knew it yet. Day 2, 11 p.m. Biscuit Karen has been okay all day, and nothing much appears to be wrong with her. She has a walking aid and can get herself to the toilet, but she doesn't want to. She shout calls a nurse to put her on the commode. A very blunt nurse points out that she's seen Karen walking, so she's not going to help her. The toilet is only 10 meters away. Biscuit Karen does not accept this. She keeps shouting for a nurse to help her. Eventually, the blunt nurse goes to check, and Biscuit Karen has actually wet herself in her passive-aggressive rage. My God. The nurse is shocked and is telling Biscuit Karen off. Biscuit Karen does not care. Meanwhile, the bed is now sodden and the sheets have to be changed. The blunt nurse helps put Biscuit Karen on the commode and then goes to get the spare sheets. Unfortunately for the nurses, other parents are being equally tricky. There's the alcoholic man who can't walk but keeps trying and falling to the floor. The polar opposite of our anti-heroine, and a woman with a broken neck who constantly takes off her nightgown and tries to go wandering. All the nurses are kept busy rounding up the strays and inevitably forget about the abandoned Biscuit Karen left sitting on the commode. Man. Biscuit Karen ensures that she's not neglected for long. Can somebody help me? Ricochets repeatedly around the OBS unit, to the dismay of all the people trying to sleep. Eventually, it becomes, somebody help me, my back hurts. Of all the disruptive behavior happening on the OBS unit, she's by far the loudest, the most persistent, and the most obnoxious, because she caused her own discomfort in the first place. I'm peeved, and so is everyone else. Blunt nurse gets back to her, and an argument starts. She's cross, as she's needlessly making the bed. Biscuit Karen is angry that she's been left in an uncomfortable sitting position. In fact, she's getting more aggressive by the second, and eventually she slaps the nurse. Yo, what the hell? Blunt nurse doesn't put up with this nonsense. She abandons making the bed, leaves Biscuit Karen on timeout, still on the commode, and ignores all shouted demands to come back. She tells the other irate patients that she's not risking further repression, and we all agree with her in solidarity. Blunt Nurse was true to her word, so eventually Deeply Compassionate Nurse tried her luck making the bed. Unfortunately for Deeply Compassionate Nurse, Biscuit Karen is a raging racist, true to stereotype, and she not only calls her the N-word, but also tells her to go back to where she came from. Oh my god. Deeply Compassionate Nurse nopes out that point, while Blunt Nurse calls security. Biscuit Karen has begun yelling every few seconds, "I want my phone! Where's the phone?" Still from the commode, presumably so she can enact her threats. "I'm going to report you! I'm going to get you fired!" The nurses aren't stupid though, so nobody gives Biscuit Karen her phone. It doesn't occur to Biscuit Karen to get off the commode and find her own phone. Meanwhile, the other patients have hit their bullshit saturation point and have started yelling at Biscuit Karen to shut up. It's past 12 a.m. and nobody can go to sleep yet. At this point, the cries from Biscuit Karen change to "Somebody help me!" every 3 seconds over and over again. The nurses are unmoved. There is a torrent of reactive verbal abuse from the other patients, but Biscuit Karen doesn't seem to hear them. In fact, she is completely devolved into a pathetic toddler tantrum. Except toddlers have more self-respect. And she stays immersed in her self-pity for a long time. Meanwhile, 1 a.m. rolls around. Security officers take their time to arrive, but when they do, they are met with what appears to be a distressed old lady who claims that the nurses are hurting her and that the Deeply Compassionate Nurse actually hit her, an audacious lie. However, Biscuit Karen is too dysregulated to keep the facade up for long and morphs back into a spiteful and aggressive harpy when Blunt Nurse goes back to fix the bed. Security officers see exactly why they were called and try to keep the peace whilst the bed is finally finished. There's not much two thick-set men can do with a small old woman perched on a commode, but they tried. Eventually, Biscuit Karen starts demanding her medication, and somebody comes up with the bright idea of calling an accident and emergency doctor. Who can quell the entitled savagery of the enraged Karen? Of course, it would be a young, handsome, confident male doctor. The very epitome of a rescuer to an old bitch who's trying to play the victim. When he turns up, Biscuit Karen becomes a sweet and compliant old lady answering, "Yes, doctor. No, doctor." She does try to repeat her lie about being assaulted, but several patient statements, 2 jaded nurses, and 2 exiting security personnel proved otherwise. The doctor gave Biscuit Karen her meds. She was helped to bed, and she fell asleep. Meanwhile, the rest of the patients on the OBS unit were too high on adrenaline to feel drowsy, so we were condemned to further wakefulness. I was glad to leave the next day. If you read this far, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the story tale. Before I get to my comments about this story, you walked into Crazanity subreddit. It's r/entitled people. What's good? Back at ya. Yeah, you're about a half hour late. Sorry. But you can go back and watch the whole thing. Rewatch it. Back to this. OP, I feel nothing but sympathy for you after reading this post. You certainly went through a ton of hell having to deal with this Karen. Thank God it was only 2 days for you. I don't even want to think about how much longer everyone else in the OBS unit had to put up with her. Anyways, I'm glad to hear that you're out of the hospital and doing better, OP. Alright, let's move on to our fourth and final story today. Presumably. Our fourth and final story was submitted by I Did a Bad Thing. Thing without the I. I Did a Bad Thing. Its title, Racist Restaurant Host Left the Business Because He Felt His Beliefs and Rights Were Being Violated. Oh boy, this one should be interesting. Let's take a look. I mentioned to an older coworker that I had a recently made Reddit account, and he read my prior posts laughing. Then asked me to tell a story from back in the 90s. The story was good, so I agreed. I typed this out as he told it to me, so just think of it as him and not me. But since I'm hearing this secondhand, I have no way to prove any of this is true. So please keep that in mind. Told by my coworker. My great uncle used to own a fairly fancy country club style restaurant / lodge. The kind that was a little hard to find in the days before GPS, but so worth it. Because there was reserved dining, a place to park RVs for night stays, and even places to play poker. He even had D&D groups coming in from time to time. About 30 years ago, when he still owned the business, he hired a man I'll call Crane. Crane was a rail-skinny, balding man with a comb-over, a big pointy nose, and a very well-groomed mustache. My uncle hired him because Crane seemingly had an excellent resume and lots of experience on the job working in high-class restaurants. Crane also claimed to have been active in multiple Civil War reenactments in which he always played a Confederate. For context, we lived in the North U.S. Because of where the lodge was located, Crane was allowed to live on site in an RV he'd brought with him since he had nowhere else to go. My great-uncle had allowed employees to live on site before when he hired people who were down on their luck. And it helped them to start over. Crane was a self-described city man, so why he ended up out in the boonies with an RV was anyone's guess. But people usually only moved out to places like that if they wanted to disappear. Crane generally rubbed me the wrong way, and only acknowledged me because I was related to my great-uncle. At the time, I was working there washing dishes and waiting tables. Crane looked at me and most other employees like we were beneath him, with squinting eyes and a raised nose. Till then, I thought I only saw people like him in cartoons. But this guy was every fancy stereotype you can imagine, right down to the penguin tuxedo he insisted on wearing. The only time I've ever worn a tux was to my own wedding, and it was rented. Crane seemingly put up a good front, and went the extra mile for the customers he liked. He was a complete jerk to those who he didn't. After a couple of months, complaints had been coming in of Crane turning people away at the door, and even pretending to have lost reservations. And the people he did this to most were people that were not white. He didn't get away with it very much, though, as a call for the manager or my great-uncle often cowed him. But he refused to stop either. I wish I had a greater detail on this, but it was 30 years ago. Eventually, my great-uncle got in a big altercation with Crane over turning away customers and Crane's attitude. The man doubled down and acted as though he were right about everything, and also used many racist terms to describe people. My great-uncle was ready to fire Crane on the spot, but the man quit before anyone could say anything else. He actually threw a cloth napkin on the floor and yelled that he was once again being discriminated against for his beliefs, and that his rights as a man weren't being met. Then he stormed out the door yelling, "No one understands him anymore," and he'd be moving back south where people will agree with him. Then he took off in his RV. No one I know has seen or heard from Crane since. But I feel like he's exactly the type of person who would claim to be a sovereign citizen, if you get my meaning. My great uncle sold the lodge and retired about 15 years later. He passed away at the ripe old age of 88. The lodge eventually went out of business under the new owners and was repurposed into a private estate. Jeez. Man, the nerve of some people. The guy was trying to argue that he was the one being discriminated against. Makes me wonder what he refers to his own discriminatory views as. So, to the OP's co-worker, since he's the one who told the story, even though it was decades ago, I feel really sorry for you. It must have really sucked, having to deal with him when you did. I also feel bad for your late great uncle because, not only because he had to deal with this racist douchebag, but also because he didn't get to have the satisfaction of firing him. Sure, the racist asshole may have quit, but it would have been much more of a win for your great uncle if he had been able to fire him before then. Even though the story said he was ready to fire the guy on the spot, that bigoted jerk took the chance away from him by quitting right then and there. But man, your great uncle, he sounded like a guy who wouldn't take shit from anyone. I hope he's resting in peace. Well, everyone, that's going to do it for this first installment of Crazanity subreddits. I'm glad I was able to provide you with some entertaining stories. I hope you enjoyed listening to each one of them as much as I did reading them. If you did, make sure to give this a like, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment below, and share this with others if you'd like. Also, if you have any stories you'd like to submit, you can provide the link to them. You can message me on Discord, or you can send them through a comment on this video or whatever. But anyway, join me for the next installment, whenever that may be. And I might do this again. Who knows? I could. Until then, so long, everybody. Have a good one.